Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully everyone is back. I'm now going to pass over to Dr. Glenn Rangwala and Matt, who are going to be doing the admissions talks from Trinity and Christchurch respectively.
Okay, thank you very much for muting me, Raj. Hello, everyone. I'm Glenn Rangwala. I'm a lecturer in politics, the politics of the Middle East, for the University of Cambridge. At the college level, I'm the Director of Admissions at Trinity College, the largest college in Cambridge for undergraduates. I look at all the applications that come in, and I deal with our outreach program as well. I oversee our outreach program too. I'm going to say a few more words about all of that in a few minutes. But first, let me hand over to Matt from Trinity Sister College in Oxford. We all have, each college in Cambridge has a sister college in Oxford, and Trinity Sister College is Christchurch. So over to you, Matt.
Good. I was about to say, I'm still muted. Yeah, hi guys, I'm Matt. I'm the Access and Schools Liaison Officer at Christchurch, so one of the colleges at Oxford. I also studied at Oxford and I graduated in 2019. I did Spanish and linguistics, and now I work for the college in access and outreach, so working for state schools across the country to address sort of like various inequalities in access to higher education. In this session, I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I'm going to try and share that now. So technical difficulties. I don't have the rights to screen share. Roma, I've sent the PowerPoint to you. Would you be able to share it?
I think
give me the power. In the meantime, while we're waiting.
I can give you the ability to screen share.
Brilliant, thank you. Just if you have any questions throughout this session, and we might have like there's a little bit of interactivity, if you go onto slido.com on another tab or on your phone and enter the code #OxfordExplained, you can ask questions there throughout, and then we can address them at the end. So brilliant, here we go. So you should all be able to see this. Yeah, I can see a few nods. That's brilliant. So just remember, if you want to ask questions throughout, then you can go on slide.do and enter the event code #OxfordExplained. So we're going to go over a few things in this session, in this sort of whistle-stop presentation. And throughout, I just want to make it very clear that whilst I'll be using Oxford as a sort of frame of reference, basically everything I'm saying is applicable to Cambridge as well, and vice versa. And then Dr. Rangwala will talk a little bit more about the Cambridge application process, where things do differ quite a bit. So why Oxbridge? Oxford and Cambridge? Well, regardless of which university you go to, you will be given expert teaching by kind of masters in their field, like probably worldwide experts in some cases. And they will also involve small group teaching, which you've, I think, spoken about already, called tutorials at Oxford or supervisions at Cambridge. As well as this, depending on what you study, if you're studying a science, then you've got, cutting edge research technology. There are loads of libraries throughout the city, museums, even stuff like a botanic garden, a language center. So there are so many resources available, regardless of the subject you're studying. And the academic support at these universities is also very high as well. So whilst people talk about, okay, there's a lot of work to do at Oxford and Cambridge, yes, there is, but also the amount of support available for you is also very high. As well as academic support, there's also a wealth of pastoral support, so supporting your mental health. For instance, this is speaking from Oxford, I know that Cambridge has parallel programs, but there's a university counselling service and then further counselling services within various colleges. There are various welfare nets within colleges. So I think Cambridge does this as well, but at Oxford, you have college families. So you get sort of assigned people in the year above who are your sort of mentors for your first term. and they might help you, you know, prepare for your first tutorial, or like be there to drop in because one of them will have done a subject that you're studying, and then you then marry and have your own college family, and then you become a mentor to people in the year below. So it really links everyone together, both with students, and also there's welfare support among your tutors as well. There's also a lot of financial support at both universities. Both universities are incredibly wealthy, which means that they have a lot of money and resources to provide students who need some financial support. And I'll talk about that in more depth in a bit. And there are also great career opportunities, no matter what you study, at both universities. So on that note of careers, we're just going to test the interactivity of this session. So if you go onto Slido now and enter the event code #OxfordExplained, and I'm just going to show a pie chart of all the careers that stemmed from one course. So this was a cohort who all studied one subject at Oxford, and these are all the careers that that one cohort went into. So you can see some went into media, journalism, some went into law, 15% went into education, some went into banking and investment, some went into arts and heritage. I want you to be thinking, and just type on your phone on Slido, what subject you think it was that they studied. So I'm just going to type the subject that I think they studied so I can see the answers that we've got. So we've got someone who said history, someone who said English, English literature. English seems to be the big one. We've got someone who said geography. Now we've got maths coming in. Yeah. So already only 10 of you have more coming in. Most of you seem to think English. And I think that, you know, probably thinking, oh, well, we've got arts and heritage, education, media and journalism. Those are sort of the big ones. But, you know, they still went into banking and investment. Actually, the answer is history. So well done to the one person who said history. But my point here is that really that could have been pretty much any subject. Any subject at Oxford or Cambridge is an academic subject, with the exception of a few subjects which lead directly into a career, like vet med, for instance. Vet med at Cambridge, where, you know, you're probably going to become a vet, or medicine, where you're probably going to become a doctor. Well, most subjects at both Oxford and Cambridge are academic, which means they lead to, they keep a lot of doors open, basically, into careers. And here are just some of the undergraduate courses that are offered at Oxford. And if you want to find out more about them, go on to ox.ac.uk/courses. So talking now a bit about Oxford the university versus Oxford the city. Well, Oxford University is the oldest university in the English-speaking world. But at the same time, when this slide was made, it was the youngest city by population. That has now been overtaken by Slough. Slough is the youngest city in England. But Oxford still does have the highest proportion of 18 to 24-year-olds. It has the highest number of 18 to 24-year-olds compared to the rest of the population in any city. And Cambridge is also one of the youngest cities in England and Wales, population-wise as well. What does this mean? Well, it means that Oxford isn't, you know, a kind of a stuffy place that some people might think it is. It's really vibrant and buzzing. There's always a lot to do and a lot to get involved with, not just as part of the university, but also with, you know, things going on in the city as well. There's a lot of culture, a lot of drama, a lot of music societies that you can get involved with. And so it's just a really cool place to live, basically. And Cambridge is the same. You know, they're both young cities, sorry, with a big student population. So it's really sort of student-driven activities going on throughout the city. We're now going to talk a little bit about the costs of university and financial support. Now, I think you're going to have you'll have the opportunity to ask questions about this with the students, but I did want to just cover it. And again, I think Dr. Rangwala is going to talk a little bit about some differences at Cambridge, but most of this information is good for both universities. So this was from 2019 entry, but the tuition fee for Oxford and other top universities is the same. So around £9,250 a year. That's the same for Oxford and Cambridge as it is for most universities in the UK. You can get some tuition fee loans and maintenance loans available from the government if you are a home student. And these go to cover your tuition fees and also some of your living costs. Now, before I go on to the Oxford Bursaries, I just want to say that even though you are taking, it is a loan that you're taking out from the government, it's not the same as, you know, a bank loan. You only have to start paying it back after you have graduated and once you are earning a certain amount of money. I think at the moment the threshold is £26,000 a year. Is that right, Dr. Manuela? Yeah, it's around that about. So it's when you're earning, you know, a good salary. So that would be a very good starting salary for graduating university. And you only have to start paying it back in monthly installments, which basically come out of your salary like the tax does. So it's not this sort of heavy weight that hangs around you for years and years that maybe other countries experience. Because I think, you know, people think, oh, student loans are going to be, you know, resting on me for years. Well, it's not America. They're not prohibitively expensive. They're not really going to affect your quality of life negatively. If anything, you know, the university, the skills that university provided you with is going to make you on a higher salary on average anyway. On top of that, there is additional financial support at Oxford and Cambridge for students from lower income backgrounds. So at Oxford, if your household income is £42,875 or less, you are automatically enrolled into the Oxford Bursary scheme. So you have to declare it to when you're applying for student loans, but it automatically rolls over and you will receive a certain amount of money, depending on how much your income is, a year to help with accommodation costs or just living costs in general. Now, currently at Oxford, about 1 in 4 undergraduates receive this financial support, and it's non-repayable. So you don't have to pay it back. It's not a loan. It's a bursary. It's given to you, and there's no separate application process for it. On top of that, if your household income is under £27,500 a year, you're eligible for the Crank Start bursary as well, which gives you a bit more money and a bit more support in other ways. And so literally under £42,875 a year, you're on this bursary and it's fine. In addition to this, if you live over 80 miles away from Oxford, you will get an additional £200 a year to help with travel costs to and from university between terms. Again, if your household income is under £42,875 a year. Then there is additional financial support offered due to the college system. So various colleges can offer different support. Accommodation is subsidised, food is subsidised. If you're living in college accommodation, so at Christ Church, they offer college accommodation for your whole course. If you're living in college accommodation, then you're only paying for the time that you're there, which transfers to 6 months rent as opposed to sort of 12 months rent if you're renting a house. And then there are additional funds as well, like book grants, travel grants. You get some rewards for academic performance. And there are hardship funds which are available to everyone that you apply to, and you say, you write to the academic registrar and you say, like, I'm struggling to support myself financially, and there are hardship funds available for people like that. So you should never have to struggle financially if you come to Oxford or Cambridge. And if you are, there is support there for you. So I'm going to spend the last bit of time just talking about the application process. So in terms of what we're looking for, I think this is fairly similar to what Cambridge is looking for. Not only are we looking for academic ability, but we're looking for the potential for you to do well in the subject that you've chosen. How are we looking for that potential? Well, we're looking for students who can demonstrate really good critical thinking skills and independent thinking skills. You know, they have students who have researched the course they want to study, been interested in it, and actually done some independent learning. You do this by exploring beyond the curriculum. So say you're studying, you want to do history at university and you're doing history A-levels, well, maybe look outside the time periods that you're researching and think, actually, I'm really interested in that time period. Let me research further. Don't just stop with schoolwork and homework. In doing so, that also demonstrates the fourth criteria, that you've got a real interest and enthusiasm in the course that you want to study and in learning in general. What we're not looking for are these three things. We're not looking for sort of irrelevant extracurricular activities. So on your personal statement, you will often, you know, spend a bit of time saying, oh, I also play a musical instrument, or I'm involved in drama, or I play sport. That's great, but that's not going to make or break your application. That's not to say that you haven't done extracurricular activities that are relevant. And, you know, work experience and things like that may be more supercurricular, so on top of the curriculum and still very relevant to your application, but extracurricular activities aren't as important. We're also not looking for people from particular backgrounds or from particular schools. So it doesn't matter where you're from. If you've got the potential to study at Oxford or Cambridge, then, you know, that is what's important, not that you went to a private school. The application process is quite long. It's a little bit longer than applying to other universities, because there's a few extra steps to get into Oxford and Cambridge, as I'm sure you're aware. So first of all, you want to be thinking about choosing a course. And then when you're applying to universities, you've got that additional stage at Oxford or Cambridge of expressing a preference for a college. Now, you can write, right, I want my college to be Christ Church. Done, brilliant, that's the right answer. Or, you know, you can choose another college, I won't hold it against you. But you can also make an open application where you don't express a preference and you get randomly allocated. Now, your college preference has no impact on your chances of getting in. So it's not like, oh, I'll apply to this college because I don't think anyone else is going to apply there. No, that doesn't really work. There's a framework in place to make sure that everyone who deserves a place gets a place. So it doesn't matter which college you apply to. And actually, people think that anyway. So Christ Church, everyone thinks, is an oversubscribed college because it's, you know, one of the more famous ones. Often not the case. Then there's an early application deadline, the 15th of October, if you're applying for Oxford or Cambridge or for subjects like medicine. And you also have to register for any relevant admissions tests or any relevant admissions tests, on that same day. And this is more Oxford specific now, because Cambridge sometimes have different tests sort of at interview. At the end of October, beginning of November, you also have to then sit those tests, and you may have to submit written work if required. So different courses have different specifications. Some have none. Some say you have to submit 2 pieces of written work and you have to do admissions tests. It varies from course to course. You will then maybe get shortlisted, and if you do, you'll be invited to join the interview process and to come to Oxford for interviews, which then take place in December. You'll usually stay up 3 to 4 days in Oxford and have 2 to 4 interviews, again, depending on your subjects. You'll usually have more than one interview, and sometimes it may be at a different college as well. Then in January, you get the results of your application. Hopefully it's successful. You then choose your choices. You put a firm choice, which is your top choice, an insurance choice, which is your second top choice. There's a big gap where you actually revise for your exams and sit your exams, and then you get your exam results and hopefully begin the course at Oxford the following October. It's worth noting that I've mentioned quite a lot of ways that we look to see who is the best candidates. We look at predicted grades, we look at your personal statement, a teacher's reference, those extra steps of admissions tests, written work and interviews. But it's really worth noting that we take the application as a whole. So it's not like the interview makes or breaks the application. It really depends from person to person, and we take them in context as well. If the school you went to for GCSEs wasn't a very good school and you really outperformed your school, your school's average, well, those GCSEs look more impressive than maybe someone who's, did well with their GCSEs, but everyone in their school did well. So we do take it into context, but we look at your application as a whole. So very quickly, if we just talk about what you can be doing now, well, research your course choices. That's probably the most important thing to be doing right now. Research what you really want to study, and then research around that course. You know, what is it that you're interested in? Really engage and explore and be proactive in your learning. So find different ways to pursue interests relevant to your course. Obviously work hard at school, try to do as well as possible. And also maybe just practice a bit. Practice discussing your academic interests, practice thinking critically and out loud, because those sorts of skills will help with the interviews, and also just with life in general. You know, that's a good skill to think about when you're talking about interviewing at jobs. And then if you do need some inspiration, there are a bunch of things that you can go to. These are both Oxford and Cambridge resources. There's the podcasts on the Oxford University website. That's how you like learning. There's Oxplore, which asks loads of big questions, and you kind of like learn more about something that you're not necessarily thought about. Higher Education Plus, HE Plus, is a Cambridge resource, which is absolutely fantastic, and so on. You know, there's a lot out there and a lot to do. So I'm going to now pass over Dr. Rangwala, who's going to maybe talk more about sort of Cambridge specifics. So I will leave this on the screen while you talk, if that's all right, Dr. Rangwala. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Matt, and welcome everybody. It's a cold but sunny day in Cambridge, and I'm very pleased to see the level of interest in this event. Matt has been talking about Oxford, but almost everything he said was relevant to Cambridge. They really are very similar institutions in terms of how they do admissions and what we look for in candidates and what we provide to students while they're here. We have very similar sorts of ambitions in what we try to do in supporting students from a whole range of backgrounds and getting them interested in the sorts of things that we're interested in as scholars of subjects, the whole range of subjects that we teach here. There are some differences of language. We talk about supervisions, not tutorials, but that is a very trivial difference. There's also a slight difference with the money side of things. The Cambridge bursary that we have at the moment is for is 3,500 for those on incomes of lower than 25,000, and it goes up to 42,620 for on a tapering scale like Matt showed you, but with slightly different amounts. We are revising that whole process at the moment, and we've had a sort of a scheme in place called a pilot top-up bursary over the last 2 years. And so by 2021, we hope, and certainly by 2022, we hope to have that in place now rolled out across the university. And that will go up to family incomes of 62,215. So even those within slightly wealthier family backgrounds, middle income families, will get a bursary from the university as a free bursary. It's not a loan. It's a gift to you to help you enjoy your time here. We think it's a really important thing that in your 3 or 4 years as a student, you do get to enjoy the cultural, social pleasures of the place. And it's not just, you know, one lecture after another or one supervision after another, but it's important that you enjoy yourselves too as a student. The biggest difference, though, between Oxford and Cambridge is not in the commitment to student support. It's not in the type of admissions criteria that we have. It's in the actual courses. So I think probably the biggest single difference is that we often teach quite different types of degree programmes between Oxford and Cambridge. The configuration of subjects is often quite different between the two universities. And so if you're interested in the sciences, for example, you've got a choice between the natural sciences programme at Cambridge, where you do a broad first year and then choose to specialise from there in your second year, versus the Oxford programmes, which are much more science specific often. And so the central thing I'll be sort of encouraging you to do if you're thinking about Oxford or Cambridge, which is best for you, is really to look at the subjects that are on offer at the two different places, because that, I think, becomes the decisive difference between the two. It becomes the issue around which that choice ends up being made. And even degree programs often with quite similar names often have quite different structures to them. So they have different options available to you, different compulsory subjects. The way in which it's laid out in the first year is often quite different. And then what you can specialise in your final year is itself often quite different. So I think it appeals to the two universities appeal to different subject interests. And to make the choice on that basis, I think is perhaps the best way to go. We can talk about that more in the questions and answers. I'm only going to say a few more words because I do want to give an opportunity for your questions to see what you're interested in finding out more about. So if the main basis for making a decision between the two is the academic interests you have, then what I'd be encouraging you to do is work out what your academic interests are at this stage. That becomes the central thing to do between now and applying for university. And that can be done through your schoolwork, of course, but also, as Matt was saying, to engage with relevant programs and suggestions from the universities about the sorts of things you can look at to develop your interests in this subject, and therefore to work out if this is the right subject for you, is, I think, a really important part of what students do in year 12 at school lower sixth form before they put their applications in on the 15th of October. It's a really important aspect of getting beyond your schoolwork, moving beyond your schoolwork and thinking about what it'd be like to study this program at degree level. So one thing I've been doing, of course, over the last couple of weeks is looking through the applications from students in year 13. And a lot of students have shown a great deal of initiative in the context of the pandemic in engaging with their subjects. They're finding out about things that are to do with their degree program. They're engaging with the podcasts and the videos and the reading and the websites that are relevant to their subject. But I am aware that that requires you to use your initiative in that respect. A lot of school students, especially those from schools which don't send many students to leading universities, have, I think, not had that push to start engaging with things beyond their schoolwork in the way that they might have done if it weren't for the pandemic. And so the fact you're here, the fact you're engaging with this course today, this day now, shows that you do have the interest. And so I would just encourage you to be in that position whereby you're thinking about what can I do to broaden my interest, to get into the sorts of things that I might be studying at university. What are the sorts of things that I could do which would give me a sense of what a university course would be like. I've just put in the chat box the link to the Cambridge Supercurricular advice list. And we've done this for all subjects on one document, so you can see it relatively easily. And it's suggestions for podcasts, for videos, for books, for articles, for websites, for competitions that you might be interested in if you want to get into this subject. And so some of it is general interest material, and it's not the sort of thing you'd necessarily be reading as part of your degree program, but it's the sort of thing that gives you a good indication if this is the sort of thing that interests you, especially if it's not a subject you've studied at school. And many of the degree programs at Cambridge and at Oxford are not directly coming out of an A-level that you're doing. They're coming out of a set of interests which you only really start studying in a detailed way at university level. And so for those subjects especially, it's important to get a good sense of what this subject actually means. What we mean when we speak about, say, studying social anthropology, a subject you wouldn't necessarily have studied before, but which is a really good subject to study. And so for that reason, at least, you'd want to sort of try out listening to a podcast, reading a book, reading a few articles from the subject before committing yourself to applying for a degree program, which will take 3 years of your life and possibly much longer of your future interest in the subject from you. So it's really important that you do get that sense before you apply for a degree program. And it's important for us that you show that in your application. So I think from our perspective, as Matt was indicating, and I'm going to put slightly more bluntly than Matt, we're not looking for passive students. We're not looking for people who just sit in class and take notes. We're looking for people who use their initiative and who are willing to sort of try out things and which haven't been necessarily, told to them that they've got to do. So that ability to show that you are willing to find things, to engage with them, to be interested in them, is a really important part for us in deciding who would actually be the sort of student who would respond well to the sorts of courses that we have here. So there are online activities, there are essay competitions, there are national challenges, those sorts of things, which I think are often an important part of going beyond your schoolwork and bringing out your interest in a way that that, you know, from our perspective, it's not so much winning a competition or anything like that. It's about participating in them, showing that you're willing to try them out and try to extend your skills and take on challenges. That becomes an important part of our assessment of your application. From yours, it's often working out if this is the right degree programme for you. And do be aware that there are alternatives, that there are many different degree programmes which might be appealing to you when you're in year 12. There are many different subjects that you might want to look at. There are subjects which you may not have studied before. There are subjects that you might have done A-levels in. But from sort of, you know, a year in advance of applying, it is good to sort of try out a few options to see if this fits you, to see if this is the direction you want to go in. And so, you know, it's perfectly fine to sample. If you're interested primarily in, I don't know, physics, then to see if, you know, chemistry is also a subject that you're interested in. If you're interested in history, also to see if literature is a subject you're interested in. They're all good. And to have that relatively broad range of interests is definitely an advantage. But then over the course of your year 12 to be reaching a decision, and then you can start sort of thinking in a more focused way about looking at the sorts of subject resources available at university level, which you can tap into and participate in, is a good way to be doing this as part of your second half of your year 12. So I just would encourage you to take up some of these opportunities that come from the resources that we make available. Both Oxford and Cambridge, as well as many other institutions, have lots of ways that they want to engage year 12 students, and to participate in that is a really important part of what we hope you get out of take away from today. Finally, can I just say a couple of words about the Oxford-Cambridge stereotype? There is a way in which, you know, we sometimes get portrayed as universities as living as part of costume dramas. Nothing could be further from the truth with these universities. For us, diversity is a central aspect of what we as universities are about. And that's not box ticking, that's not, you know, non-discrimination principles. Both universities have a very large cohort of students from across all demographics in the country, and we really value that as universities. At my college, 37% of our home students, our UK students, are of either Asian or Black British heritage. It's over a third of our UK intake, and then we have a very significant overseas intake too. And that just brings a sort of cultural and intellectual vibrancy to the university and to the college, which we really value as a place. So I would hope that you see that aspect of what is that we do, and that you want to become part of it. So I look forward, if you are, to welcoming your application, and perhaps October 2022, welcoming you here. So there's the opportunity now to put to us any questions or themes you'd like us to address. I'm hoping that that there's a system whereby you can submit questions or topics. Yuvraj, could you help us out here? Is there a way in which people can submit?
So I've seen 2 questions come up on Slido, and I suppose they can continue to ask them there. But I imagine, you know, they can also ask them on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So I don't have Slido, so you'll have to read them out.
Yeah. So the 2 questions that have come up so far, I'll just. So the first one I think was asked maybe before. After I started speaking before you, how should I choose between Oxford and Cambridge if they are so similar? I think, yeah, like as you said, the courses is where it really comes down to it. There are differences in the 2 cities. I think if I had to give a point to Cambridge, they definitely have more natural beauty. It's definitely a prettier city. The river it runs through the city, and it looks beautiful. So there's little things like that. But, you know, it really is the courses.
Asher has asked a question specifically about politics at Cambridge. So I'm not sure how much of an interest it will be to everybody else, but just to say, it's a very diverse department in terms of the sorts of subjects that we teach. A lot of politics departments around the country have a very specific speciality that they do a lot of, say, for example, quantitative work, or a lot of British politics, or a lot of, a particular theme, Cambridge politics has deliberately tried to stay very diverse in its approach. There is no mainstream politics approach in Cambridge. We've got a strong focus on political theory in the first year, but from there, a lot of our students go study world politics, a lot of our students study European and British politics, a lot of our students study a particular theme, such as the politics of gender or the politics of conflict. And so we've deliberately kept it in a way that we don't have a single speciality as a department which leads the way. Partly because we found that our students, really enjoy that sort of breadth of understanding of what it means to study politics. And so it's a department which is rapidly growing. We used to be a relatively small department. Now we're one of the largest in the country. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've grown a lot. And so it's a really vibrant place, and it's a really interesting place as well, because you're always meeting people with different views, different perspectives on the world, and different ways of engaging with the study of politics in the department. So I'll leave that there. I mean, I could talk forever about that topic, but I think you're probably the only other person here who's interested in it alongside me. So.
We've got another question has come through. I think it's about the interview process. My friend said when she interviewed at Cambridge, she then had to sign something saying she wouldn't talk about what was asked in it. Is that true? I'm not sure that's true.
So so the one thing we say is we don't want you telling the exact questions. So of course you can talk about what it was like to be interviewed and to give a sense of what it was like to be interviewed to somebody else, but it's the exact questions which often we think are best kept between the interviewer and the interviewee as a way to go. So in that respect, at least, that's correct. That's partly because we don't want students sharing information, especially immediately after the interview, with other people who are going to be interviewed by the same people, because then that will give an advantage to the people who are being interviewed later, because they will know the sorts of questions that they're going to be asked. So there is that restriction. But absolutely feel free to talk about what it's like to be interviewed. That's not a problem at all. Yeah,
definitely. I think the interviews at both universities are, they're try to be transparent processes, and you'll be able to find interview style questions. I don't know the link for the Cambridge, but if you go on to ox.ac.uk/interviews, basically all the short links are ox.ac.uk/whatever it is you're trying to find. So I've just put, I spelled interviews wrong.
From Cambridge's perspective, we did a couple of mock interviews with our students, one in law, one in engineering. And of course, if you're interested in those subjects, these are still relevant, just to give you a sense of the sort of way in which an interview works. And so we filmed full mock interviews we got current first year students and sat them down with a subject that wasn't their own, and did a mock interview with those students quite recently to give you that sense of what it's like to be interviewed. We're going to do another one for remote interviews. We do that on Monday because this year, of course, students aren't coming to see us in person. We're not doing face-to-face interviews. We're doing them all at my college via Zoom. And so that's a slightly different experience to do this on Zoom as an interview. And so we're going to film a mock Zoom interview and put that up on Monday. And of course, by the time you apply, hopefully we'll be back to face-to-face interviews, but of course, who knows? So at least you can see what it'd be like if you were to do a mock interview remotely.
Definitely worth watching anyway, just to see the tips and tricks. Yeah, I mean, just to address the question of, do you have to sign anything at Oxford? You don't have to. I don't think you have to sign anything, but it's in your best interest not to sort of go back to the common room and say, oh yeah, in my interview, they asked me exactly this, this and that, because, someone who's just about to have their interview might hear that. And actually, as a personal anecdote, as I was going into my Spanish interview, where we had to speak Spanish for a few minutes, and I was going to be given some source, the girl who had just interviewed came out and her friend was waiting for her, and she said, oh, it was great. They gave me a comic strip about biscuits. And so I went in like, okay, what's the Spanish for biscuits? Okay, yeah, remember it. Went in, and lo and behold, yeah, it was the same comic strip about, and it was like, the joke was, it was about like two old people, and They were married, and he thought she was having an affair, but actually she was just eating the biscuits in the biscuit tin, and you had to sort of understand it. But yeah, like, you know, she shouldn't have said that, because I had a mini advantage. And so it's worth, you know, keeping to yourself during the interview process, but then, you know, afterwards it's fine. Do we have any more questions?
I've never done an interview with comic strips before, but you're giving me ideas on what to do in my interviews this year.
Yeah. It was a Spanish language interview. It wasn't testing like my literature knowledge. You know, we don't study comic strips in Spanish literature. We don't have any more questions coming through on the Slido page, as far as I can see.
That came in earlier in the day, which might be helpful if you want to. It was how important are GCSE grades in the application process? And many year 12s this year didn't sit the GCSEs. Will this be taken into account?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is a slightly different answer for Oxford and Cambridge. So Oxford, we do look at GCSE results. And that is part of the admissions data, and that is part of whether you get a place. We contextualize GCSE results. So you also get contextualized score, which shows how you performed compared to your school, which is an important point to note. They will be aware, obviously, that this was the year that had central assessed grades, and there was a massive disruption. So, you know, tutors aren't going to be like, well, it wasn't important. And, you know, they're almost having this year to be like, the A levels were disrupted. What can we do? What we think about here? So by the time your year applies, yes, they will definitely be taken into context. I won't have forgotten about the pandemic and all the disruption it caused. And so they'll definitely take that on board. Dr. Ramwala, do you have?
So in general, it's very similar. We both take GCSEs into account when we're looking at applications, and we both contextualize them in a very similar way to each other as universities. In 2021 applications, so students who didn't take formal exams but got central assessed grades for their GCSEs, what we were advising to teachers is to give us marks from school tests. So we are giving quite strong advice to teachers that, you know, if they're doing mock exams, tell us what the results from those mock exams were for the students. Tell us, you know, where they came in the year. Tell us how you assess the work that they've been doing relative to their peers. If you can reinforce that in your conversations with your teachers, that'd be really helpful. So if all we've got is, you know, central assessed grades from your GCSEs and no other information, I'm afraid that isn't that helpful for us. What we want is sort of information about your schoolwork that you've been doing since you've been back in school, and how your teacher can assess that relative to other students in your year. So what we find really useful is when teachers say, in this test, she came second in a class of 30, or, you know, in this test, she came 7th out of 52 students in the school who took this test. That's the sort of information we really find helpful in being able to say, yes, this is somebody who is performing well, who's consistently getting good marks, who's not just sort of being lucky with a school that's given centre assessed grades generously. I'm afraid that will be part of the suspicion of many admissions officers in 2022. And so for those who are applying for 2022 entry, but we can actually see sort of we've got information there which says something more specific than that. And that's where internal school testing really becomes helpful for us, for students in your year group.
Yeah.
So we're telling teachers that all the time, but if you can just sort of prod your teachers in that respect, that really would, I think, be helpful.
Do we have time for one more question? I've just received a question on the chat. I know we're running slightly over. The question is, what, in your professional opinion, are the most important factors you look for when choosing applicants for competitive courses? I think the factors will be the same. So, Dr. Ramwala, do you want to just? There
is a lot of variation. I mean, between sciences and arts and humanities subjects, for a start, there are differences, and there isn't a single factor for any of them really. for some subjects, we're looking for people who have shown initiative. For some, we're looking for students who've studied this subject well before. For others, that's not the case. For all students, there has to be a high level of prior academic attainment. So that was coming back to the question about GCSEs, coming back to the question about school tests. I think for all students, we're looking for students who are performing well at school. Where it goes beyond that, I think, is a bit more subject dependent. Some subjects do want, especially those with a more professional career path that are tied to the course, are looking for students who've. So medicine is the obvious case where they are also making a judgment about who would go on to be a good medical doctor as part of their assessment. That's an important part of the medicine admissions process. Other subjects, that's not a relevant consideration. So I'm afraid the answer is it varies, but the one common fact is a high level of prior academic attainment. Simple as that.
I would add as well that the tutors who, for the interviews, the tutors who are interviewing you are also seeing whether, this is someone who clearly would enjoy that style, enjoy and relish the style of teaching that is at Oxford and Cambridge, that, the tutorial supervision teaching, and, whether they would benefit from it as well. So how well they do in that sort of environment where you're maybe thinking on the spot, you're not necessarily, okay, you've got an opinion, and then the tutor might introduce a new bit of information. How well do you adapt to that? Do you think, oh yeah, overall my opinion is still valid, even considering that? Or do you go, actually, maybe a more nuanced answer is needed? It's sort of that style of thinking, that style of academic critical engagement in the subject that is key, I would say as well. I haven't received any more questions. Have you, Dr. Ranwala, received any more?
I haven't. No, I'm only looking at the chat box.
Yeah. No.
And
and we haven't on Slido.
Okay. I must try and figure out what Slido is.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for introducing me to it, Matt. And thank you very much for hosting the event, and thank you all for being here. Pleasure meeting you all. I hope we've encouraged you to think seriously about applying some more.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and I'll see you at the tour. Bye, guys.
All right, everyone.